Hello and welcome to Doctora Rocio. Welcome to the Work podcast.
Thank you for having me here.
It's such an honor. We first want to start from the beginning, or wherever you feel called to share about your origin story.
Thank you. Um, so, as you say that, I'm receiving the memory and visions of my motherlands, which is in Jalisco, Mexico, southern Jalisco, Mexico. Indigenous lands, what we call Mexico now. And so my family comes from very humble beginnings, from people of the earth, both my maternal and paternal lineage are very much work closely with the land. And my abuelita, who recently transitioned, was a plant medicine woman. And so that's sort of my lineage. And both on my maternal and paternal side, I come from a long line of healers and seers. And so I just want to name them because I think a lot of people are drawn to my work and feel the potency of my work. And partly that some of that is my own unique soul imprint, but it is also very much because of my ancestors. And so they are very much with me in their work, and in my work, and we work together. And so just wanting to honor them in this moment. Um, Part of my story is also I'm a born seer, though as a child, because of colonization and immigration, the generation before me didn't speak much about that. We're sort of disconnected from that. And so I had what you can call very supernatural moments as a child, things that scared me because no one was talking about them. And and more in this phase of my life, I've been able to embrace that all. Though I've not always been here, it took me time to get here.
Wow. Thank you for sharing your ancestry and where you came from.
Mhm.
I believe that that really does give a lot of your groundedness and your the feeling I get when I watch your content. It seems like you're doing this, as you say, decolonial shadow work, but also from a place of spirit, of the divine, of um, something beyond even the mind, something that's
Mhm.
connected very much to even the spirit of this earth. So
Mm.
that just gave me so much more context to the work that you do. And
Thank you.
yeah, do you actually mind defining decolonial shadow work? I don't know if you've trademarked that, but
Yes, thank you for that. I also want to say here that I have indigenous roots and I work with an indigenous lineage, the Quero Inca Nation. I want to honor my teachers, Don Alejandro Apasa, Don Justino Apasa, and also Mari Lucien is one of my teachers as well, and a beloved sister. And so the work that I do does feel at times honestly difficult to explain. I find myself moving through different phases of the work and different pieces of it being revealed to me. And so visions that I receive from the lineage, visions, higher timelines that I am able to see and have access to. And sometimes that feels difficult to translate in, our language and the language of this time. And so um, I trust that whoever hears it and hears the call um, is those that are meant to and that are ready to usher in this new world. And so my work is both decolonial and spiritual is one way to describe it. The decolonial work is really about deprogramming and unlearning the ways that we've been programmed by the colonial paradigm. And when I say the colonial paradigm, what that means is this collective lie that we've bought into, that to be white is superior and to be a person of color is inferior. And that not just who you are, but also the ways and the medicine and the knowledge, right? That the white way of doing things is superior. It's what we call success, right? Even if we're doing, maybe we're drawn to indigenous medicine, the way that we tend to work with it is in a colonial way, right? Like faster and more, right? All of that is part of the programming. Decolonial work is also the dismantling of the colonial paradigm. So, this world that we exist in, which my work is also influenced by Bell Hooks, which is a Black feminist writer, and she calls it the white imperialist capitalist patriarchy. And I use some of that language and say it's the colonial capitalist patriarchy. And so part of the decolonial work is to dismantle that, right? This new world that we all want, we also need to dismantle the old world, right? For the new world to get there. And so for me, what I really feel called to bring people into is, yes, sometimes that work is activism, it's political, and also it's spiritual, right? And I think that is where some of the work has lacked in the past. The movements that we've seen, I want to honor them because they've gotten us here. And also what I believe we've really missed is the spiritual, right? Like we've been trying to get free and create a new world, but using the old colonial ways to get free, right? And so for me, I see it's no wonder that we're still here, because we're still doing it in a colonial way, right? And so to be able to do that, to be able to get to the new world, to the new earth, we need to do decolonial shadow work, which means you need to do the shadow work that is not just your own personal stuff that you've experienced, right? Your own personal shadows, but our colonial shadows, the collective shadows of living under this paradigm, under this predatory, destructive paradigm, right? And so all those ways that we've learned to extract from each other, right? To exploit each other, right? As some examples, that is part of the decolonial shadow work. For me, it's the deepest shadow work that we need to do to be able to access a higher vision.
You know, it's so interesting that you say that, and you said a few things that are threads to something that is a theme that continues to come up for us, which is the way much of the New Age community cherry picks and fetishizes different cultures, specifically South American cultures and Central American cultures, and without spending the time. Sorry, my dog is here. Without spending the time, and without wanting to do the extended work, they seek to jump to serving the medicines. As someone who comes from people who work with these plant medicines, what does that make you feel? And can you speak to your experience around that?
Yeah. And so I want to say that the New Age movement, as you describe, I believe is part of the colonial paradigm. That what we think is, I think when we think of parts of our society that are destructive, it's easy to identify, let's say, white supremacy or colonization, right? Like, I think most people that can hear that and that understand that can identify that. But also, it is the way that mainstream spirituality has shown up, mainstream wellness and mainstream psychology, mainstream education. These are also, as I say, heads of the colonial dragon, right? They are places of our society that we've been taught to view as benevolent, as helpful, but that are actually causing more harm, right? And so I believe that New Age spirituality, while maybe at first the intentions were helpful, right? To get people to perhaps, identify with spirit outside of an institution, right? For people to see you can have that direct connection. Initially, it was well intentioned, but it has also caused harm, right? And so, just as you say, there has been a lot of cultural appropriation of sacred indigenous medicines, indigenous wisdom. And it comes from, I feel it comes from especially white folks, right? White European folks that are disconnected from their own roots, right? And so here's the piece where I think there isn't enough people speaking about, and part of my work does that, is that all of us were harmed by colonization. Of course, Black, Indigenous people of color the most, but white folks too have been bamboozled, have been harmed, right? And so they seek our medicines because they don't know their own, right? And so it it's even more harmful for folks of color because not only do we have this wound of colonization, but now you also want to continue to take away our medicine and our wisdom, right? Like there's deep wounds there. And so partly I think it's white folks not being connected to their roots, which is part of the decolonial shadow work that I do with the white folks that I work with. And also I think it's very much coming from a place of ego, right? And this is what I identify as the white colonial mind, that the more certifications I have, the more medicines I'm proficient in, the more lineages that I work with, the better. And that's actually not the way that it works, right? That's part of the colonial paradigm that we've been taught to view that more is better, right? But that more lacks depth, right? And so medicine and wisdom that is going to truly make an impact, right? It requires depth, it requires discipline, right? And I think in the New Age movement, there's a lot of that missing.
Mm-hmm. I'm just like shaking and nodding my head the whole time because you gave words to everything that we've been witnessing the last couple of years working in these communities. And I feel very strongly that a lot of white folks don't want to do this work because of shame and guilt. And you
Yes.
mentioned that as well. And if I can just define shame by Dr. Brene Brown, she defines it as an intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. And so when you are doing this work, and you do call in a lot of white folks, specifically on your platform and your work, how do you get beyond the shame and guilt that is such a roadblock to this work?
Yes, thank you for bringing this in. This is part of the decolonial shadow work. And there's so many layers here, which is why I love that you brought this in. I think part of the movements before, and when I say movements before, it's been like the civil rights movement, then it's like diversity, inclusion, and the more recent one is anti-racism. And so I want to say that all of those are important. They're very much important. Anti-racist work for white folks needs to continue. And also, those movements are not going to get us to the new earth because in some way it is still abiding by the rules of the colonial paradigm. We're still using colonial labels. And when I say colonial labels, even the notion of race, right? That was invented by the colonial paradigm. And so this is a very nuanced conversation. I'm not saying that race isn't important, that it's not real. It is in this paradigm. And we need to evolve to a place where we're not so entrenched in those labels, in those narratives, right? Because when we use those labels and narratives, we become trapped in the stories of inferiority and superiority. We continue for folks of color to stay in the wound, right? Like in this perpetual wound that doesn't lead us to healing and liberation, right? And for white folks, they stay in this perpetual shame and guilt, right? And so this, the decolonial work is a part of my work, right? It's the dismantling of this paradigm. And also what I say that is that we need to simultaneously birth the new world, right? And here is, as a medicine woman working with the Quero Inca lineage, the prophecies of the new earth come from many indigenous peoples. I speak to the prophecy of the Quero Inca lineage, which is that we need these times of chaos and disorder are sort of meant to wake us up, right? And that then we need to evolve to the highest timelines, to the highest visions, to harmony and balance. And so if we continue in these colonial narratives, we're not going to get there. We're in sort of like this perpetual loop of colonization, right? And so I know that that might be difficult for some people to hear or understand. I want to be clear that this is not permission for white people to say, then my decolonial work and my anti-racist work is not important. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we need to do both, decolonial and spiritual. And so I am really, as being a medicine woman in the Quero Inca lineage, I am always rooted in compassion in the work, right? The Quero Inca people are people of Munai, which is great love and great compassion. And so to do decolonial work, I think compassion is absolutely necessary, right? Like it is too hard to do it and not do it with compassion, not do it rooted in compassion, for several reasons. One is that all of us have been programmed, right? And so we are all unlearning. And so to engage in sort of self-righteousness or judgment isn't helping anyone, right? It isn't helping us get free, isn't helping us heal. Also, when we stay in the wound, right, we become sick. When we stay angry, we become sick. For white people, when they stay in the shame and guilt, right, like they don't continue on the journey, right? They become stagnant. And so my work is to really help people to do the dismantling, but to not stay there. Because sometimes people stay there, right? For Black, Indigenous people of color, they stay in the anger, right? Or they stay in the wound. And for white people, it's staying in the shame and the guilt. And so I say consistent compassion and consistent courage, right? And really learning how to alchemize those energies, right? We don't want to bypass them, right? I'm not saying that they're not important. For folks of color, we do need to tend to that anger and those wounds. For white people, you need to really look at that shame and guilt. What is it trying to tell you? What is it trying to teach you, right? For white people in particular, I say the shame and the guilt is showing you where you are out of integrity with humanity, right? So I'm not saying to bypass these emotions. I'm just saying to not stay in them.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So you lit a fire in such a beautiful way. I love that you said that in our communities, while having some of these tougher conversations around the experiences of Black-bodied folk with my white friends, I have been really harmed by their encouragement to just not feel and bypass. And so for me, a part of that change is that collective anger. It bubbles over and it forces the roof off, so to speak. And I am also incredibly cognizant of the intentional spiritual warfare on BIPOC by consistently showing on our social media, right? Imagery of people of color being harmed, telling stories of people of color being harmed, to keep that rage and that anger and to keep people held down.
Yes.
And one of our friends, Cassandra, who we interviewed in the first season, talks about the sophistication of white supremacy. And this really speaks to it, because how sophisticated, so that in an effort to liberate us, what liberates us when it overgrows, when it becomes too much, keeps us down.
Yes, thank you for that, Brittany. And this is the piece that I really invite people to understand. And I love that you brought it in here, that this is spiritual warfare, right? Like, and this is why we need to do this work spiritually, right? So that means we're not always going to abide by the human made constructs and the narratives, right? It's important to see them, right? To really sort of heal the way that they have impacted us. But we don't want to completely give all our energy to it, because when we do that, and I'm specifically speaking for folks of color, when we do that, we give our whole life force to it, and we unconsciously colonize ourselves. We unconsciously oppress ourselves because we stay in the pain, right? And I'm speaking about this as a medicine woman now, but I'm also speaking about this as someone who used to do this work in that way, in the way that I'm saying not to do it. And so I've learned it through my own lived experience. Prior to the work that I'm doing now, I was a professor. Most of my life, I was in academia. I also have a PhD in counseling psychology. And as a professor, I did anti-oppressive work. Every day going into the classroom, I felt like I was going into war. Like I was literally prepared for war with my white students. And that for 10 years led to a health collapse. Like I had all of that anger and all of those emotions, the wound I was so present with. And so I'm not just speaking as a medicine woman, but as someone who did it the wrong way, right? And saw the negative impact that it had on myself. And so we can't stay, it's important to process the anger, right? And then we have to learn to transmute it, to alchemize it, because otherwise we're doing the colonizers' work for them, right? Yes. We're colonizing ourselves.
Yes.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Bingo. And now they walk away, right? It's like that. It's like, what do you call that when you just make money unintentionally? It's like it's just working by itself now.
Yes, passive colonization. Yes.
Yeah. Colonization. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I also believe what you're saying, and you can correct me if I'm getting way too galactic on you, is it's spiritual as well, because there's a timeline in which, in this timeline, our consciousness is attuned to still the colonized mind, and we still live under colonization, let's be honest.
Yes.
But
yes.
But then there is another timeline going parallel to the one that we're living, where we are living in harmony, where it is the new world and it is a new earth, and we are more synchronized to Mother Earth. And so you being a seer, you can see that timeline, and at one point the timelines can collapse to where
yes,
we are at that point. And so it's spiritual, because we have to simultaneously be in the 3D in this form, but also we can almost like astral travel. I don't know the right words, but we can use our spiritual practices to also embody being equal and liberated.
Yes, yes. And this is not too galactic. You're speaking my language as well. And so, yes, absolutely. When I say currently we're living in the colonial paradigm, right? Exactly what you said. Colonization never ended. Indigenous peoples know this, right? When we hear colonization, we think it's something of the past, but it's something that always continued. And what I say is colonization is a historical event. It is also current, and it is also a mindset, an agreed upon reality. And so here in this current timeline that we're existing in, that is the agreed upon reality, this paradigm that we're speaking about, right? But it is not the only reality, and it is not the highest reality, right? And so we almost have to learn to walk in between the worlds, which is what medicine people do, seers do, right? They know how to do that. And what the masses need to learn to do is to be able to do that as well, right? And so I walk here in this current timeline to dismantle it, but I also need to learn how to access that highest timeline to bring it together, right? Like simultaneously doing that work.
Oh, I have chills. Well, because as an astrologer, we're going through our Pluto return next year in America, like
Yes.
exactly. And Pluto is the planet of shadow work, actually, and all of the stuff of our historical past. So I feel that we are at a tipping point now where if you have not seen it, which I'm like, where are you hiding under a rock?
Yes.
Like, it's
Yes.
definitely going to be showing itself to you, and also more specifically, white-bodied folks.
Mhm. Yes. And I think that when we can sort of get white folks out of this shame and guilt, right? Like to see it as a teacher, not to personalize it, then I think more of them can hear it, right? Because, and this is just on a human level, right? When we feel attacked, right, on a human level, part of us shuts off, right? Like we don't really receive the message. And so I am not saying that folks of color, your anger is not valid. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that it is clear the way that we have been doing things is keeping us in a perpetual colonial loop. And so we need new skills, right? And so that means we need to be able to do decolonial work, number one, right? And do it from a place of compassion. And if you are not yet in that place of compassion, then there's more work there, right? There's more disentangling that you need to do from the colonial paradigm, because the colonial paradigm is still siphoning your life force. And so this is the piece about spiritual warfare, right? We sometimes think we're working towards liberation, but when we are so charged, meaning we can't access the higher timelines, right? We can't see past this current colonial paradigm. Our literal life force is being siphoned, right? Like who benefits by all of us being divided and separated, right? And so there is just a higher intelligence that we need to be able to access, right?
From your experience and your wealth of knowledge and wisdom, how would you encourage white-bodied folks, or anyone really, to express the unity consciousness that exists in other timelines, that perhaps they've seen or are seeking or wanting to bring here to this timeline, in a way that doesn't erase the BIPOC experience,
Yes.
or doesn't cause more harm?
Thank you for this question, because again, I want to say that we need to do both. We need to do the decolonial and the spiritual. And so if there are white folks listening, I want to say that this is not permission for spiritual bypassing, that I don't want my words to be weaponized for spiritual bypassing. And so, yes, unity consciousness is real and we need to get to that. But we can't truly get to unity consciousness until we see the ways that we are currently being divided, right? Like you can't bypass that, right? So if you're, and this is the new age movement moved to unity consciousness without doing the decolonial work, without doing the anti-racist work, right? That is spiritual bypassing. That is not doing the shadow work, the decolonial shadow work that is needed, right? And to be honest, I question some of the visions that the new age movement has. I don't know that they are real because they don't feel rooted to me, right? It feels like, and I'm just taking a deep breath here because there's a whole industry, right, of people that have been speaking about this for a really long time. And I question that because it's more of an illusion that has been created. It is something that has been repackaged, right? Like it makes people feel good, right? And it feeds their ego, right? To say, I can see the highest visions, but show me where your shadow work is, right? Show me where the shadow work of you undoing the harm of this earth, right? Show me where that is, right? All of us know we can't access the highest visions unless we do our shadow work. Maybe we can have peeks at it, right? Like that's possible, but we truly can't have the whole vision or the whole picture without us being really rooted and doing our own work, right? Until we become a clear vessel. And so I believe all of us here need to be able to almost like, right, it's a limpia, like doing the shadow work to cleanse all that colonial, right, programming, that colonial gunk, like all of that, so that we are clear for the vision.
Collective limpia.
Yes. Yes.
You mentioned Mari Lucian of Mujer Medicine at the beginning of this conversation, and we had her on for season 1, who she used one of your quotes about the new earth. And you mentioned that this has been prophesied for many, 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 many years. Since none of us really know, at least me, I don't know what this looks like. People think of it as a utopia, as like the Atlantis and Lemuria, or a place of the Garden of Eden. Where are we collectively moving towards? What does this actually look like?
Yes, I get this question a lot. And it's not something that I define, right? Like, and that's the thing. The new earth is something that is co-created, right? So it is something that we all have to work towards, right? Like, and it's a collective vision, but it is also like part of it is localized, right? Like it's gonna start from our communities and from the ground, like like us tending, like I see a vision of like tending to the land, right? Like to our communities, to our neighbors, like all of that, right? That is part of the new earth. What I know from the prophecy of the Quero Inca nation is it's about harmony and balance, meaning that all of these illusions, right? Like it's an extreme, right? Like that utopia that we envision when we think of the new earth, that is an extreme, right? What is harmony and balance within that? Meaning, does that include all of us, right? When people speak of the new earth, they also say like it's abundance, and like we all have money, or like we're all millionaires, right? Like that is not in balance, right? Like, and so we really have to question and I want to take this down, right? Like my success, for instance, am I making room here for other people, right? And is my version of abundance, which New Earth is a part of that, is my version of abundance inclusive of other people, right? And let's say the financial piece, which abundance does not equal just financial abundance, right? And just individual financial abundance. If I have financial abundance, am I sharing that, right? Like that's harmony and balance. Am I sharing that with my community? Am I making it accessible for other people? So am I well and am I cared for? And also, am I providing ways for other people to be well and cared for?
Yeah. I don't think that people ask themselves that enough. It, like in this 3D reality also, you know, and I think that's that is a part of the practices and the culture of many Indigenous communities that attracts white-bodied people into the space, and that is one of the reasons why I think that they try and take on these practices and even a whole persona around it.
Right.
It kind of breaks my heart a little bit because there's almost like this poor lost, like it reminds me of like of a lost child, you know, that's like just running to anything for affection and nourishment and not really getting it, and instead causing more harm.
Yes.
Or being almost parasitic and how it takes from its host, from the loving communities, until there's nothing left.
Yes, right. And that's what I think people, thank you for sharing that. I think especially white people, like this is a way of life, right? Like it's not just extract what I like, the medicine that I like, right? The things that make me feel good. This is a way of life. And this is what we mean by harmony and balance, right? Are you, for instance, if you're using sacred plant medicine, have you developed a relationship with that plant? Right? Are you tending to that plant and the people that take care of it, to that community, right? That's the way that Indigenous peoples relate and exist, right? And I think white folks in their white colonial mind just see, let me take and let me extract what feels good for me, right? And that's the individualistic thinking. And also some folks of color do the same, you know. We all have to unlearn this way of being.
Yes, I was just thinking as you were sharing earlier about certain new age spiritual, I say that in air quotes, and um, influencers talking about their visions and talking about the new earth. I'm just wondering too if they are all creating their own reality by bypassing this one, because of the density and because of the lack of shadow work. Are they all in a different reality on their own?
Yes. Yes, thank you for this. So it's possible. It's possible. And so this is where discernment is needed, right? Like these people, and I'm speaking to everyone here listening, these quote unquote spiritual people that you are following, that you are listening to, that you are reading about, right? Is their work really rooted, right? Like, are they, or is it like a feel good, right? Do you get like a feel good shot, right? From just their work? Or is their work really rooted, meaning sometimes they make you uncomfortable, right? And that discomfort is needed. And so this is where we all have to we really have to discern and really have to be careful with who we give our energy to, right? Because whoever we give our energy to, even if it's just following, we're amplifying that reality, you know? And so really be discerning about who you're following. And to stop seeking like this feel good shot, right? Like where we are, the time that we're existing in, right? Like we are on the brink of extinction if we don't change course. And that's not an exaggeration, right? And this new earth and this prophecy that we speak about, it's a probable reality. It's not guaranteed, right? So we all have to do our work. And so the ways that we collude, every one of us, we really need to, dig deep and look into that. What am I colluding with? How am I upholding this colonial reality, right? Even in who I'm following on social media, the way that I do my work, right? All of these things, because maybe those people that you spoke of, that they're creating their own, utopia. If we're not careful, we're colluding with that, and we're making that new earth, right, the reality. And so we really have to be discerning with our energy. Yeah. And when you said that, what I I was laughing because it's an illusion, right? And I'm going to be really honest here, is that a lot of the quote unquote spiritual people on social media, they don't know what they're talking about. And I don't say that to like being mean or like, it's just the truth. A lot of people read the things and then they read it on social media. Like a lot of people's spiritual work was born in social media by reading memes. It is not work that is rooted, right? So let's stop colluding with that, right? And let's be like, ask questions. Like, it's okay to ask questions. Like, where did you learn this? What is the lineage that you work with? Like all of that. And let's look into that. I think that's important.
It's so funny because it's like an elementary school science teacher talking about astrophysics. It's like, or rocket science. It's like you can understand the basic principles or some of the basic principles without really or understanding.
Well, just before you came into the conversation, Britt and I were talking about how sometimes the truth and being honest and making people uncomfortable is taken as or received as you're triggering me or you are hurting my feelings. And we face this a lot because of the Werk podcast and the work that we're doing about talking about these real topics that are going to make people uncomfortable. So I would also offer to people listening that just because it makes you feel uncomfortable or it stirs something inside doesn't mean that it's necessarily bad, or it's not that it's not true either. And maybe the uncomfortable feeling is the thing that you need to break through to something.
Yes. And honestly, every spiritual person, if you're really doing spiritual work, every spiritual person knows that, right? Like you have moments where you need to be in the shadow. And so if your spiritual journey, I want to say here too, for those listening, if your spiritual journey has not had moments of shadow work, what you have been really doing is disassociating from your own pain and from this reality. That is not spirituality. Spirituality is both about the highest visions, right? Like the euphoria sometimes we experience, and it is also about the shadows and the pain and the discomfort we experience.
So I just wanted to ask you, I mean, you've pretty much explained this throughout this whole conversation, but what work do white folks have to do? And maybe you can talk about your workshops and the work that you offer.
Thank you for this question. I do want to say there's so many layers to all of this work, right? Like there's so
Yeah.
much that showed up for us today. And so I want to honor all of those layers, that this work is complex, that there's a lot of nuance, and that it's ever evolving, you know? And so we are literally creating, like we're literally dying to the old world and being born to the new earth in this moment. And that feels like such an honor. Like, what an honor that we get to be here. What an honor that we were given the opportunity to be born in this time, right? For this new earth, for this new consciousness to happen. That for me feels like an honor. Like I didn't know that I signed up for this. I didn't remember that, you know. And you know, even like 7 years ago, I didn't know like that it was gonna come to this, but it's undeniable now, right? That we're in an evolution of humanity that has never before been seen, right? That we have that opportunity. And so just naming all of that of the work. For those that feel called to work with me, I do, again, my work is both decolonial and spiritual. I do see the decolonial as needed. It's the shadow work that we need to do the limpia, right? Like being truly available for the spiritual. And I think even just for folks to realize, like, oh, the spirituality that I've had access to, right? Maybe that isn't the totality of all that I can experience. Maybe it isn't the totality of all that's available. Maybe it is part of it's just a small inkling, right? And so for those that are really resonating with my work, I have a few self-paced courses for folks that are willing to do that work that is necessary. I want to speak to the white folks here that we need you in this work, that this isn't work that is just for Black, Indigenous people of color, that this is work that needs to be led by Black, Indigenous people of color, but it is not work that is just for them. We need all of us. And as a medicine woman rooted in Indigenous lineage, what I think is helpful for people to know is that we are all peoples of the earth and we all come from peoples of the earth. And so if we can remember that, right? If we can remember that to hold us when the work gets tough, you know, and if we can remember to hold each other in compassion so that we can stay resourced in the journey, then I think that will help us move towards those difficult places. And so I also have a weekend intensive that I offer for white folks where we do the shadow work, the decolonial shadow work. We cast out evil spirits, we connect to pre-colonial ancestors, like there's access higher timelines, like there's all of that. And so if you're really seeking for that, I encourage you to engage with my work and to learn more.
Wow, I would love to be a fly on that wall. That that must be so interesting. Wow, what beautiful work you do.
Thank you.
Wow. What is your message for the world?
Thank you for that question. It feels beautiful. My message for the world is to one, drop into your heart, right? Because in this colonial paradigm, we're just so in our heads much of the time. And so really to drop into your heart and to lead from your heart, right? That when we lead from our heart, then we can connect in the ways that we've been missing. Then we can really hear each other, right? And also to show up courageously, right? Because we are in spiritual warfare times. And so, yes, we need to be loving. And also, there is times to be courageous and to be warriors. And so to really hold those multiple truths, to expand your capacity for being a lover and also a fighter when that is needed. We need both.
Ooh, so beautiful.
So beautiful. Wow.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctora Rocio, for your time, for your wisdom, and all the work that you do. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you.
Thank you. The honor has been mine. It was so beautiful to connect with you both.